On today's show, why was it time for the Philadelphia 76ers to move on from Doc Rivers? What should the Sixers be looking for in their next head coach? And how much does the decision of who their next head coach is play into James Harden's pending free agency? Should the Sixers be trying to bring back James Harden at all costs? It's all coming up right here at Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Next game, how about Jimmy Butler to score more than 26.5 points? What about LeBron James to have more than 7.5 rebounds? Or how about Jason Tatum to have less than 6.5 assists? Or what about Jamal Murray to have more than 3.5 three-pointers made? So what is Prize Picks? It's daily fantasy sports, but how does it work? Basically, you pick 2 to 6 players. If they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 25 times back on your money on any entry that you submit. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. And Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that simple. They're safe. They offer fast withdrawals. Currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. And right now, every day of the NBA playoffs and the finals, one Prize Picks user will win a chance at becoming a millionaire. But you have to download the app to find out how. So download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That means if you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. So don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Joining us now is the host of Locked On Sixers, Devon Gibbons. You can track down wherever you listen to your podcast and on YouTube. Just search Locked On Sixers. Now, Devon, the Sixers moving on from longtime head coach Doc Rivers earlier this week. Why was it time for the Sixers to move on from Doc Rivers as their head coach?
Well, simply because nothing changed from the previous regime in which Doc Rivers took over for Brett Brown. 3 exits, a number 1 seed being knocked out in 2019 to the Atlanta Hawks. The issues in year number 2, not all his fault because Joel Embiid had a broken orbital bone and a tear in his hand, another second-round exit there. And then the way that this one collapsed just 2 weeks ago, where the 76ers actually last weekend, about a week ago, to the Boston Celtics, the way things happened in game 6 and 7. Very, very clear path if you are getting past with all due respect to Miami or the New York Knicks at that time, to get past the Boston Celtics, no Milwaukee Bucks in your way. This was the path. This was year 3. This is what the moves that were made last offseason and even during the trade deadline and picking up Jalen McDaniels, that this was the move. This was the year to get them finally past that second round exit. And if Ben Simmons was the scapegoat before, you have a free agent in James Harden after he opts out of his deal, who else are you going to look at to point the finger at for the last few failures? Ben Simmons is no longer here. James Harden, you want to keep. And Joel Embiid is not going anywhere either. Daryl Morey's not firing himself. Who's next? And that's the head coach, and that's how it played out.
If you had to choose one word to best describe Doc Rivers' tenure as head coach, what would it be?
Unfulfilling.
Okay.
Because, again, second round, 3 years in a row for Brett Brown. He comes in as the guy supposed to get them over the top. It didn't change. So while he may have had a number 1 seed, as we mentioned, a clear path in this year based on taking a 3-2 series lead going into game 6 on your home floor, you did not do anything by moving on and getting past that second round, that all too hard to get past second round for the 76ers. Doc Rivers didn't do it. So with that, I would say that it was unfulfilled. And that's where it, basically leaves. And I wasn't a big Doc Rivers supporter with him coming in a few years ago during the year of which it was the pandemic and all. But knowing that he was the best on the market, I understood it. And even this past year, I thought he did a really good job. I thought he did a decent job in the playoffs, Jackson. But in the end, he didn't do what they asked for, and they thought that it was time to move on. Doc Rivers thought that this, as he mentioned it, a one-on-one that he and I had, and he talked about how this team was ready. Well, they didn't show it in game 6 and 7. They showed it in the other games, but 6 and 7, or at least let's say the final 5 quarters of the season, they did not show it.
So at this point, in your eyes, what are the Sixers looking for, or what should they be looking for in their next head coach? And how much of that decision with some of the names that are maybe out there on the marketplace right now is tied up in what happens or doesn't happen with James Harden regarding his free agency?
That's the question right now. And based on what Daryl Morey had to say with his press conference on Wednesday, the middle of the week last week, he talked about more about championship experience or pedigree. And that's only a short list of names that are available right now, from Frank Vogel to Monty Williams being in the finals, Mike Budenholzer, and certainly Nick Nurse. So if that's the case, then you're looking at some of those names. Now, the Mike D'Antoni piece that was talked about before Doc Rivers got the job 3 years ago. James Harden, if he is to stay, which Daryl Morey openly has pointed out that he wants him to stay, then clearly the connection there, as you well know, with the Houston Rockets, that's still there. Now, the age part, 72 years of age, it's a little concerning, but he has stayed in the basketball world there on the bench with Steve Nash, year 1 of the Brooklyn Nets, taking some time off since then. However, that's the one connection there. Now, for me, if I'm answering as the guy who's helping Daryl Morey making the choice, Jackson, since you asked me that, I need some more innovation on offense. We know Joel Embiid can score. We know he can do that. Tyrese Maxey can score also. I just need some more innovation, some more creativity on the offensive end. And I think that's really important in the next coach that is brought in here, because, again, we already know what Joel Embiid can do. He can lead the league in scoring 2 years in a row and win an MVP. But they also – it gets stagnant a bit at times, and I think some things have to change with whomever the coach is next.
Of the available coaches, is there one that you maybe have in mind that kind of addresses that need that you just pointed out?
My favorite right now, personally, is Nick Nurse. And they had to do it differently with that offense, especially when you had a championship team and Kawhi Leonard and Kyle Lowry. So they can do a lot of things, and even when your offense isn't flowing the right way, you can bust it up. Same thing with having Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam at that time with Marc Gasol, who's a very good passer in the middle. You have a different thing here when it comes to Joel Embiid. He's a different animal of how you can get involved. So I do think, though, that you can get a little more creative with him because of his skill set from the inside and outside. And if you have some things with some motion also, guys driving to the basket can drop the ball off to him a little bit where he doesn't have to work as hard and get easier baskets. So right now for me, I'm very curious with Nick Nurse, because we saw the iteration with Leonard and Lowry and Gasol to later on having to do it with a small ball lineup where they had to get creative there. So that intrigues me a lot for the Sixers with what they currently have.
At this point, should the Sixers look to bring James Harden back no matter what it looks like? Are you comfortable with the idea of a 4-year, full-blown max, $200 million deal with him? And if not, what would be kind of the ideal outcome for a James Harden free agency to return to the 76ers?
Yeah, for me, and I think that I would like this scenario, and especially if you heard my partner, Keith Pompey, we're both hosts of Locked On 76ers. Keith broke a story on Friday stating that the Houston Rockets and James Harden, the marriage, they're trying to do that all over again. And there's real mutual interest there. So if that's the case, to answer your other question, no, I do not want to give him a 4-year contract. It's not my money. But in terms of covering the team, being around the team as long as I have, of course, I have somewhat of a vested interest in them and seeing how they do things. And I don't think that's in their best interest to give a 33-year-old point guard who couldn't, for whatever reason, while he gave you the other 2 games that he won with the 40-point performances, and even Game 5, he was tremendous, 17, 10, and 8, in the way that they won in Game 5 to give them the 3-2 series lead. But for whatever reason, Jackson, in Game 6, in that final quarter when you needed your point guard to maybe step up a little bit, as fatigued as he may have been, whatever it was, whatever the excuse, you just needed it. Let's talk about it after we win and move on to the next round. He couldn't pull it together for that 5 minutes to close the game out. I had an issue there. And then in Game 7, basically wasn't there. So outside of the dunk that he had where the C's parted, he broke down the lane, got a dunk. Other than that, man, I really don't see a reason why they would bring him back outside of the issues that there may be problematic of trying to fill and build a roster and bring someone in to help out the way that he did this past year and a half, and replacing 20 and 11 on any given night. Hopefully they can work a sign and trade situation to make it happen where you could still get some really good pieces in here to take over if he is in fact moved on from.
Who will ultimately be the Sixers' next head coach? Will James Harden be a Sixer next season? Of course, you'll have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Sixers. Devon, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Thanks for having me, man.